The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, "Security personnel to first-class cabin." Jasmine Washington froze mid-sentence, her prestigious economics award still in hand, as 3 officers surrounded her seat. Across the aisle, a smug white woman smirked victoriously. Neither knew the airline's CEO was watching everything unfold from row 7. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. And if you believe in exposing injustice, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of accountability. Now, let's find out what happened before this confrontation and how it changed lives forever. Jasmine Washington checked her watch nervously as she navigated through the crowded terminal at Reagan National Airport. In just 24 hours, she would be standing in front of Harvard's most distinguished economics professors and potential investors, presenting her groundbreaking research. At 22 years old, she had already accomplished what many academics spent their entire careers working toward. The weight of the Franklin Economic Innovation Award certificate in her carry-on reminded her of how far she had come. When Professor Michaels had called her name at the ceremony last week, Jasmine had almost forgotten to breathe. She was the first black woman to ever receive the prestigious honor, a fact that filled her with both pride and a heavy awareness of responsibility. Her research on economic disparities in urban communities had caught the attention of the academic world, challenging long-held assumptions and offering innovative solutions. The path to this moment had been anything but easy. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Baltimore, Jasmine had watched her mother Tanya work double shifts as a nurse just to keep food on the table. Their small apartment was filled with second-hand furniture and discount store decorations, but also with books, hundreds of them, collected from library sales and thrift shops. "Education is the one thing they can never take away from you," her mother would say, helping Jasmine with homework after returning from a 12-hour shift, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but bright with determination. Jasmine's academic promise had been evident early on. In 4th grade, her math teacher had pulled Tanya aside during a parent-teacher conference. "Your daughter has a gift with numbers," the teacher had explained. "She's solving problems meant for students 3 grades ahead." But gifts needed nurturing, and in Baltimore's underfunded public schools, resources were scarce. Tanya had taken on a 3rd weekend job to pay for math enrichment programs, sacrificing her only days off to ensure her daughter's talent wouldn't go to waste. By 16, Jasmine was tutoring college students in calculus for extra money. At 17, she received a full scholarship to Howard University, becoming the first in her family to attend college. Her mother had cried that day, holding the acceptance letter as if it were made of gold. "You're going to change things, baby," Tanya had whispered. "You're going to open doors." At Howard, Jasmine had flourished under the mentorship of Dr. Eleanor Jenkins, a fierce economist who recognized the young woman's potential immediately. It was Dr. Jenkins who had encouraged Jasmine to pursue her research on economic mobility barriers in communities of color, providing guidance while allowing Jasmine's unique perspective to shine through. The resulting thesis had been revolutionary, combining rigorous statistical analysis with first-hand interviews and historical context to demonstrate how seemingly neutral economic policies perpetuated racial wealth gaps. When she submitted it for the Franklin Award, Jasmine had never actually expected to win. The previous recipients had all been established economists with decades of experience, not a recent graduate from Howard. And yet, here she was, boarding a flight to Boston to present her work to people who could help implement her ideas on a national scale. The airline had upgraded her to first class after learning about her achievement, a courtesy extended to Franklin Award winners. Jasmine had never flown first class before. Growing up, vacations had meant visiting her grandmother in Virginia on the Greyhound bus. Even after receiving her scholarship, financial constraints had kept her firmly in economy class, typically in the middle seat between 2 strangers on budget carriers. As she approached the first-class check-in counter, she straightened her navy blazer, a graduation gift from her mother who had saved for months to afford it, and tried to project the confidence she didn't quite feel. The ticket in her hand was legitimate, but she couldn't shake the sensation that at any moment someone would stop her, question her presence, ask her to return to her proper place. It wouldn't be the first time. Throughout her academic career, Jasmine had grown accustomed to being the only black woman in rooms full of privileged white peers, to having her ideas questioned more rigorously than others, to watching less qualified classmates receive opportunities based on family connections rather than merit. But the Franklin Award had validated what she had always known deep down, that her work mattered, that her voice deserved to be heard. The certificate carefully protected in her carry-on wasn't just a recognition of her research, it was proof that excellence could transcend barriers. As the gate agent called for first-class boarding, Jasmine took a deep breath. Tomorrow's presentation could open doors not just for her, but for the communities her research aimed to help. She couldn't afford to let nerves or imposter syndrome hold her back now. She just needed to get through this flight, review her presentation one more time, and get a good night's sleep before the big day. Simple enough. Jasmine had faced more difficult challenges in her life. This should be the easy part. What she couldn't have known was that the next few hours would test her in ways far more demanding than any academic competition, forcing her to confront the very biases her research documented in a painfully personal way. Reagan National Airport hummed with activity as Jasmine made her way to her gate. Business travelers in pressed suits rushed past, dragging sleek carry-ons and speaking urgently into earpieces. She felt distinctly out of place among them, despite her professional attire and confident stride. At the security checkpoint, the TSA agent examined her ID with unusual scrutiny, glancing between her face and the photo multiple times. "This is you?" he asked, his tone implying doubt. "Yes, sir," Jasmine replied evenly, maintaining eye contact. He eventually waved her through with a skeptical expression that Jasmine had encountered many times before, the look that said, "You don't belong here." With an hour before boarding, she stopped at an overpriced airport cafe. As she approached the counter, a white businessman cut directly in front of her as if she were invisible. "Excuse me," Jasmine said firmly. "I was next." The man turned, appearing genuinely surprised to see her. "Oh, sorry about that. Didn't see you there." The barista, a young white woman with a blonde ponytail, addressed the man first. "What can I get for you, sir?" Only after taking his order did she acknowledge Jasmine, and when she did, her customer service smile dimmed slightly. Small interactions like these had become so routine that Jasmine had developed an internal cataloging system, minor everyday bias, not worth the energy to address. As she waited for her coffee, an elderly black man in an impeccably tailored suit approached her. "Howard University?" he asked, nodding at the small alumni pin on her lapel. "Yes, sir," Jasmine replied, surprised. "Class of 2025. Reginald Moore, class of 78, he said, extending his hand. "Always good to see another bison making their way in the world." They chatted briefly about the campus changes over the decades, and when Jasmine mentioned her Franklin Award, Mr. Moore's eyes widened with genuine respect. "That's extraordinary," he said. "I've been in economics for 40 years and know exactly how significant that achievement is." "Where are you headed today?" "Harvard. I'm presenting my research tomorrow." "They're lucky to have you," he said with a warm smile. "What airline?" "National Airways, first class," she answered, still not quite believing it herself. Mr. Moore chuckled. "Well, I'm on the same flight, though back in economy. Perhaps we can continue our conversation on board." His kindness provided a brief respite from the tension Jasmine had been carrying, a reminder that allies existed in unexpected places. That moment of comfort was short-lived. As Jasmine lined up in the first-class boarding lane, she became aware of someone staring at her intently. A white woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a designer suit with an expensive leather handbag, was eyeing her with undisguised suspicion. Karen Whitfield, though Jasmine didn't yet know her name, had the confident posture of someone accustomed to privilege. Her blonde hair was professionally highlighted and styled, her makeup flawless, her manicure fresh. Everything about her screamed wealth and entitlement. When the gate agent called for first-class boarding, Jasmine stepped forward with her boarding pass. The agent, Bethany Adams according to her name tag, took the pass and examined it carefully, more carefully, Jasmine noted, than she had for the passengers ahead of her. "May I see your ID as well?" Bethany asked. Jasmine provided her driver's license, maintaining a pleasant expression despite the familiar sinking feeling in her stomach. After checking both documents twice, Bethany reluctantly handed them back. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Washington." Behind her, Karen Whitfield whispered loudly enough to be overheard, "They're letting anyone into first class these days." A man in a business suit chuckled uncomfortably, while an older couple exchanged disapproving glances that Jasmine couldn't tell were directed at Karen or at her. As she made her way down the jet bridge, Jasmine took slow, measured breaths. She had learned long ago that displaying anger or frustration would only reinforce negative stereotypes. The constant calculation was exhausting: how to stand up for yourself without being labeled aggressive, how to address prejudice without making others uncomfortable, how to exist in spaces not designed for you. On board, the first-class cabin gleamed with luxury: wide leather seats, complimentary champagne, flight attendants offering hot towels. Jasmine found her seat, 3A, a window position offering both privacy and a view. As she stored her carry-on in the overhead compartment, she was acutely aware of Karen Whitfield settling into 3B, directly across the aisle. Karen made a show of clutching her handbag tighter and shifting away slightly, as if Jasmine might reach across and snatch it at any moment. The message was clear: "You don't belong here, and I don't trust you." Jasmine sat down, buckled her seatbelt, and focused on appearing completely at ease, as if flying first class were an everyday occurrence. She pulled out her tablet, intending to review her presentation. But the weight of Karen's suspicious stares made it difficult to concentrate. The tension in the small shared space was palpable. Other passengers settling into first class seemed to sense it too, some avoiding eye contact while others watched with morbid curiosity, waiting to see how the situation would unfold. Jasmine had experienced prejudice throughout her life, but rarely in such close quarters with nowhere to escape. For the next 2 hours, she would be trapped beside someone who had decided, based solely on her appearance, that she didn't deserve to be there. The thought of her mother's sacrifices, of the hard work that had earned her the Franklin Award and this very seat, strengthened her resolve. Karen Whitfield might question her right to be there, but Jasmine knew exactly how she'd earned her place. She belonged in first class every bit as much as anyone else on the plane. What she didn't realize was that Karen's prejudice was about to escalate from uncomfortable stares to something far more confrontational. As the remaining passengers boarded, a flight attendant moved through the first-class cabin offering pre-departure beverages. When she reached their row, the attendant turned to Karen first. "Would you care for champagne, water, or orange juice before takeoff, ma'am?" she asked with a practiced smile. "Champagne, please," Karen replied, returning the smile. The attendant nodded and turned to Jasmine almost as an afterthought. "And for you?" "Orange juice, thank you," Jasmine said. When the attendant returned with their drinks, she placed Karen's champagne on her tray with a napkin and a warm "enjoy." For Jasmine, she simply set the juice down with barely a glance. These subtle differences in treatment were familiar to Jasmine: the slightly less attentive service, the minimally cooler tone, the assumptions made based on appearance rather than actual status. Most people wouldn't notice such nuances, but when you experienced them daily, they became impossible to miss. Jasmine had just taken a sip of her juice when Karen leaned slightly across the aisle. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I think you might be in the wrong section. This is first class." Jasmine met her gaze evenly. "I'm aware. This is my assigned seat." Karen's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Really? Are you sure you didn't misread your boarding pass? These seats cost $1,200. "I'm sure," Jasmine replied calmly, returning her attention to her tablet. But Karen wasn't finished. "I fly this route twice a month, and I've never seen," she paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "I've never seen someone like you in first class before." The implication hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Jasmine considered several responses before deciding on directness. "I'm presenting at an economics conference at Harvard tomorrow," she explained, though she knew she shouldn't have to justify her presence. "I recently won the Franklin Economic Innovation Award, and the airline upgraded me as a courtesy." She hoped this would end the conversation, but Karen's skepticism only deepened. "The Franklin Award? That's very prestigious." The emphasis on "very" suggested disbelief. "Aren't those usually given to established economists? You seem rather young." "I'm the youngest recipient to date," Jasmine acknowledged, forcing herself to maintain her composure despite the growing knot of tension in her stomach. Karen smiled thinly. "How nice. I suppose these diversity programs are really opening doors these days." The comment stung exactly as intended. The assumption that her achievement must be the result of lowered standards rather than exceptional merit was one Jasmine had encountered repeatedly throughout her academic career. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, clearly overhearing the exchange. An older white man across the aisle frowned disapprovingly, though Jasmine couldn't tell if his disapproval was directed at Karen's rudeness or at Jasmine's presence. Determined to defuse the situation, Jasmine put in her earbuds and opened her presentation slides, signaling that the conversation was over. But Karen wasn't done. "I'm just saying," she continued, speaking loudly enough that Jasmine could hear her despite the earbuds, "that standards used to mean something. Merit used to matter. Now it seems like they're just handing out seats, and awards, to meet quotas." Jasmine removed one earbud. "My research stands on its own merits. The selection committee evaluated my work, not my race or gender." "Of course they'd say that," Karen scoffed. "But we all know how these things really work." The flight attendant passed by again, and Karen signaled her attention. "Bethany," she said, having clearly noted the attendant's name tag earlier, "I'm curious about the upgrade policy. Does National Airways have some kind of diversity initiative for first class?" Bethany looked uncomfortable, glancing between Karen and Jasmine. "All our upgrade policies are based on customer status, special circumstances, or courtesy considerations, ma'am." "Special circumstances," Karen repeated with emphasis, as if this confirmed her suspicions. Jasmine tried to focus on her presentation, but concentration had become impossible. She was accustomed to having her achievements questioned or diminished, but usually, she could walk away from such encounters. The confined space of the aircraft made escape impossible. As she shifted in her seat, her bag slipped from her lap, and the carefully protected Franklin Award certificate fell out onto the floor between the seats. Before Jasmine could retrieve it, Karen had leaned over and picked it up, examining it with unconcealed skepticism. "Franklin Economic Innovation Award," she read aloud. "Presented to Jasmine Washington for groundbreaking research on economic mobility barriers." She handed it back with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Looks professionally printed, at least." The implication that the certificate might be fake was the final straw. Jasmine took the award back, carefully returning it to her bag. "My achievements are real, Ms. Whitfield. Karen Whitfield. Senior Vice President at Pharmatech Industries." She said it as if the title should automatically command respect. "Ms. Whitfield, I've earned my place here through years of hard work and academic excellence. I don't owe you explanations or justifications for my presence." Karen's face hardened. "Well, I think it's suspicious. A girl your age, in first class, claiming to have won an award typically given to people with decades of experience. Something doesn't add up." The "girl" designation wasn't lost on Jasmine. At 22, she was a grown woman with a master's degree, yet Karen deliberately infantilized her to undermine her credibility. The cabin had grown quieter, other passengers now openly listening to the exchange. Jasmine felt trapped in a public performance she hadn't consented to, forced to defend her very existence in a space she had legitimately earned the right to occupy. The situation was rapidly becoming untenable, but the worst was yet to come. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Karen demanded suddenly, her voice raised enough that several nearby passengers turned to look. Jasmine took a deep breath. "No, you may not. I've already been verified by the gate agent and flight attendant." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I just find it hard to believe that someone your age could afford first class without some kind of special accommodation." "Whether you believe it or not isn't my concern," Jasmine replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. An older woman across the aisle glanced between them with obvious discomfort. A businessman 2 rows ahead had turned around to watch the developing confrontation. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had grown unbearably tense. Karen pressed the flight attendant call button repeatedly until Bethany returned, looking concerned. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Yes," Karen said immediately. "I don't feel comfortable with my seating arrangement." Bethany's professional smile remained fixed in place. "I'm sorry to hear that, Ms. Whitfield. The flight is fully booked, but I can check if anyone might be willing to switch." "That's not the issue," Karen interrupted. "I don't feel safe." The word "safe" hung in the air like a weapon. Jasmine felt her cheeks burn as several passengers turned to stare at her with newfound suspicion. "Ma'am?" Bethany looked confused. Karen lowered her voice to a stage whisper, still perfectly audible to everyone nearby. "I'm not comfortable sitting next to someone who might not belong here." "How thoroughly did you check her credentials?" A different flight attendant approached, Michael Torres according to his name tag, a man in his mid-30s with a stern expression. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. Before Bethany could respond, Karen leaned toward him. "I believe someone may have snuck into first class," she whispered, though not quietly enough to prevent Jasmine from hearing. "She claims to have been upgraded, but the story sounds suspicious." Michael looked at Jasmine with a neutral expression. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Though humiliated, Jasmine produced her boarding pass for the 3rd time since boarding. Michael examined it and nodded. "Everything appears to be in order," he confirmed. But Karen wasn't finished. She suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her designer handbag. "My wallet," she exclaimed. "It was right here, and now it's gone." The implication was unmistakable. Head swiveled toward Jasmine, whose heart was now pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Are you accusing me of stealing from you?" Jasmine asked, her voice finally breaking with the strain of maintaining composure. "I'm not accusing anyone," Karen said with exaggerated innocence. "I'm simply stating that my wallet was here a moment ago, and now it's missing." Michael looked deeply uncomfortable. "Ms. Whitfield, that's a serious implication. Are you certain you didn't misplace it?" "I know exactly where I put it," Karen insisted. "Right here in my bag, which was open on the seat next to me while I was speaking with Bethany." Tears of frustration and humiliation threatened to spill from Jasmine's eyes, but she refused to cry. "Not here. Not in front of these people who already saw her as something less than them." "You can check my belongings," she said, her voice tight. "I have nothing to hide." "That won't be necessary," Michael began, but Karen cut him off. "Actually, I think it is necessary. Either check her bags, or I'm calling the authorities myself. I have the air marshal's direct line from previous flights." The confrontation had reached a breaking point. Several passengers were now openly staring, some with discomfort, others with curiosity, and a few with what looked like genuine concern for Jasmine. Michael hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the desire to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, perhaps we could move this conversation to the galley for privacy." "No," Karen said firmly. "This needs to be addressed right here, right now. Either check her bags, or I'll assume you're not taking the safety of your passengers seriously. Does this situation make your blood boil? Comment number 1 if you've ever witnessed racial profiling like this. Hit that like button if you believe people should be held accountable for false accusations, and subscribe to see justice served in stories like these. What do you think will happen next? Will Jasmine's bags be searched, or will someone intervene? Let's find out as our story continues. The standoff continued for several excruciating minutes. Michael, clearly conflicted between customer service protocol and basic human decency, eventually stepped away to consult with the lead flight attendant. Passengers whispered among themselves, some casting sympathetic glances toward Jasmine, others eyeing her with newfound suspicion. Karen maintained her posture of righteous indignation, repeatedly checking her handbag and sighing dramatically. "I just don't understand how these things happen on premium flights," she said loudly to no one in particular. Jasmine sat perfectly still, her back straight, her expression carefully neutral despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to break down now. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "They'll try to make you forget your worth. Don't you ever give them that power." After what felt like an eternity, Michael returned, accompanied by a man in plain clothes with an almost imperceptible bulge beneath his jacket, Air Marshal Brandon Hayes, though he didn't identify himself immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption," Michael announced to the first-class cabin. "We need to address a situation before takeoff, which may cause a slight delay. We appreciate your patience." Two uniformed airport police officers appeared at the front of the cabin, and a collective murmur spread through the passengers. This was escalating far beyond what Jasmine had anticipated. Brandon approached their row, his expression professionally blank. "Ma'am," he addressed Karen first, "I understand you've reported a missing wallet?" "Yes," Karen replied, her voice dripping with affected distress. "It was right here in my bag, and now it's gone." I wasn't going to say anything, but given the circumstances. She glanced meaningfully at Jasmine. "And what circumstances would those be, ma'am?" Brandon asked, his tone neutral. Karen lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Well, it just seems unusual. A young person like her, in first class, with a story about some award that doesn't quite add up. And then my wallet disappears. I think the connection is obvious." Brandon turned to Jasmine. "Ms. Washington, correct?" Jasmine nodded, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Yes, sir. Would you mind telling me why you're traveling today?" Though she resented having to justify her presence yet again, Jasmine explained about the Franklin Award and her upcoming presentation at Harvard. She showed him her conference invitation and university credentials. "And how did you end up in first class?" he asked. "The airline offered an upgrade when they learned about the award. It's apparently a courtesy they extend to Franklin recipients." Brandon nodded, then turned back to Karen. "Ms. Whitfield, when did you last see your wallet?" "Right before boarding, when I purchased a magazine at the terminal. I placed it right here in my bag afterward." She gestured to her leather handbag. "And it was in the outside pocket?" Brandon asked. "No, I always keep it in the zippered inner compartment for security." "May I?" Brandon gestured toward the bag. Karen handed it over with obvious reluctance. Brandon carefully opened the inner compartment, reached inside, and, to Karen's visible shock, pulled out a black leather wallet. "Is this your wallet, Ms. Whitfield?" The color drained from Karen's face. That's impossible. I checked that pocket. It appears to be right where you said you left it," Brandon observed, handing it back to her. A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin. Karen opened the wallet with trembling fingers, confirming that nothing was missing. "Well," she said, her voice strained, "better safe than sorry these days, isn't it? You can't be too careful." The non-apology hung in the air. Brandon's expression remained professional, but his eyes had hardened slightly. From several rows back, a male voice called out, "That was completely inappropriate." Another passenger added, "She should apologize." Karen's face flushed red. "I was simply concerned about my belongings." "Anyone would be." "Anyone?" an elderly woman questioned pointedly. "Or just when sitting near certain people?" The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, more passengers now openly condemning Karen's behavior. The public sentiment was shifting decisively against her. Jasmine remained silent, the vindication bringing little comfort after the humiliation she had endured. She simply wanted the ordeal to end so the flight could depart and she could focus on her presentation. Brandon turned to address both women. "Is there anything else that needs to be resolved before takeoff?" Before either could answer, a man rose from seat 7C and approached the group. His tailored suit and confident demeanor immediately commanded attention. Jasmine recognized him from airline advertisements, Jackson Pierce, CEO of National Airways. "I believe I can help clarify the situation," he said calmly. Karen's expression transformed instantly from indignation to surprise. "Mr. Pierce. I had no idea you were on board. I'm Karen Whitfield, SVP at Pharmatech. We actually supply your company's employee health program." Jackson nodded politely but without warmth. "Ms. Whitfield, I've been observing this situation since it began. I was in the terminal when Ms. Washington checked in, and I personally approved her upgrade after learning about her remarkable achievement." Karen's smile faltered. "Well, I was simply concerned about—" "I understand your concern," Jackson interrupted smoothly. "But I've also observed a pattern of behavior that troubles me deeply." He turned to Brandon. "Officer, we have cabin cameras for security purposes. Would you mind reviewing the footage from the past 20 minutes? Brandon accepted the tablet Jackson offered, scrolling through several minutes of video before nodding grimly. "Ms. Whitfield," Brandon said, "the footage clearly shows you checking your wallet after claiming it was missing. It was never out of your possession." The revelation sent another wave of murmurs through the cabin. Karen's face cycled through expressions: shock, embarrassment, and finally, desperate defensiveness. "There must be some mistake," she insisted. "I truly believed it was missing at the time." From a few rows back, a familiar voice spoke up. "Excuse me." Reginald Moore, the Howard alumnus Jasmine had met in the terminal, stood from his economy seat where he'd been observing the situation. "I witnessed this young lady being subjected to similar treatment at the airport cafe before boarding. The pattern of behavior is consistent and concerning." Bethany, the flight attendant who had initially been cool toward Jasmine, stepped forward hesitantly. "I should acknowledge that I may have been influenced by Ms. Whitfield's comments when she boarded. She made several remarks about standards being lowered." Bethany's cheeks flushed with shame. "I provided different levels of service as a result, and I apologize for that." Jackson Pierce nodded, then turned to Karen. "Ms. Whitfield, National Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. I've just checked our records, and this isn't the first complaint involving you on our flights." Karen's expression shifted to alarm. Those were completely different circumstances. 3 complaints in the past year, Jackson continued, all involving unfounded accusations against minority passengers or crew members. The cabin had grown utterly silent, all eyes on the unfolding scene. Jasmine felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, yes, but also exhaustion and a deep sadness that such incidents remain so common in 2025. Jackson turned to Jasmine. "Ms. Washington, on behalf of National Airways, I extend our sincerest apologies for this experience. Your achievement should be celebrated, not questioned, and your journey should be comfortable, not traumatic." He then addressed Karen with businesslike formality. "Ms. Whitfield, I'm afraid I need to ask you to deplane." Karen stared at Jackson Pierce in disbelief, her composure crumbling. "Deplane? You can't be serious. Do you know who I am?" "I'm fully aware of who you are, Ms. Whitfield," Jackson replied evenly. "I'm also aware of our company policies regarding passenger conduct, which I personally implemented last year." He gestured for her to gather her belongings. "You have 2 options. You can deplane voluntarily and we'll rebook you on tomorrow's flight, or we can have this documented as an official incident, which would have different consequences." Karen's eyes darted around the cabin, searching for allies and finding none. Even the passengers who had initially seemed sympathetic to her now avoided eye contact, unwilling to associate themselves with her behavior now that it had been exposed. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "I'm a loyal customer who spends thousands on your airline every month. All I did was express reasonable concern about my property." Jackson remained unmoved. "Was it reasonable concern that prompted you to request seat changes on 3 previous flights after being assigned next to passengers of color? Or to file complaints against 2 flight attendants of Middle Eastern descent, claiming they were suspicious?" Karen blanched. "How did you? Our system flags patterns of behavior, Ms. Whitfield. As CEO, I receive reports on recurring issues that might indicate systemic problems within our company. Your name has appeared in those reports multiple times." Around the cabin, several passengers had taken out their phones, discreetly recording the confrontation. Karen noticed and grew even more agitated. "You can't allow them to record me. This is a violation of my privacy." "Actually," Brandon interjected, "there's no expectation of privacy in a public setting like an aircraft cabin. As long as they're not interfering with crew member duties, passengers are permitted to record." Karen turned to Jasmine, desperation replacing her previous condescension. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding. I never meant to imply anything about you personally." Jasmine met her gaze steadily but said nothing. After years of enduring microaggressions, blatant discrimination, and having to be the bigger person, she felt no obligation to ease Karen's discomfort. Jackson checked his watch. "Ms. Whitfield, we need to resolve this situation. We've already delayed departure by 17 minutes. Karen's professional instincts finally seemed to override her indignation as the reality of her situation sank in. She worked for Pharmatech, which had a substantial contract with National Airways for employee healthcare. Creating a public scene with the airline's CEO present was career suicide. "Fine," she said, gathering her belongings with shaking hands. "I'll take tomorrow's flight. But this is completely unnecessary and unprofessional." As she stood to leave, Reginald Moore stepped forward from his economy seat. "Excuse me, Mr. Pierce, but before Ms. Whitfield departs, I believe there's something she owes Ms. Washington." Karen's jaw tightened. "I've already said it was a misunderstanding." "An apology," Reginald clarified firmly. "A sincere one." The cabin grew silent again as all eyes turned to Karen. The humiliation she had so eagerly inflicted on Jasmine was now being returned to her tenfold. After a long, tense moment, Karen turned to Jasmine. "I apologize if my concerns came across as inappropriate. If..." Jasmine finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "You falsely accused me of stealing. You questioned my credentials and achievements. You made assumptions based solely on my appearance. There's no if about the inappropriateness of your behavior." Karen's face flushed again. "I apologize for my behavior," she amended stiffly. Jackson nodded to the airport officers, who escorted Karen toward the exit. As she disappeared down the jetway, a collective tension seemed to lift from the cabin. Jackson turned to address the remaining passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We'll be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience and understanding." He then sat down in the now vacant seat beside Jasmine. "Ms. Washington, I want to personally assure you that what you experienced today does not represent our company's values. I'd like to offer you an upgrade to our premium first-class service for this flight, and complimentary first-class travel for your return journey." Jasmine nodded, still processing the whirlwind of events. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. I understand from our PR department that you'll be presenting groundbreaking economic research at Harvard tomorrow," he continued. "Would you mind telling me more about it?" As the flight finally prepared for takeoff, Jasmine found herself explaining her research on economic mobility barriers to the CEO of a major airline, a man who seemed genuinely interested in her findings and their real-world applications. Across the aisle, Bethany approached with a fresh orange juice and a sincere apology of her own. "I'm truly sorry for how I treated you earlier," she said. "There's no excuse for allowing someone else's prejudice to influence my behavior." "Thank you for acknowledging that," Jasmine replied, accepting both the apology and the juice. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Jasmine gazed out the window, reflecting on how quickly the situation had transformed. What began as yet another demoralizing experience of discrimination had become something entirely different, a rare moment of public accountability. She thought about all the times she'd had to swallow similar indignities without witness or vindication. How many others endured the same treatment daily without a CEO's intervention or viral validation? Her research suddenly felt more urgent than ever. The economic barriers she documented were inseparable from these social realities, the assumptions, the denied opportunities, the exhausting toll of constantly having to prove one's right to occupy certain spaces. As the plane lifted into the air, Jasmine opened her presentation again, seeing it with fresh eyes. Today's experience wouldn't just be an anecdote, it would become data, another proof point in the larger pattern her work sought to address. The plane had been in the air for 20 minutes when Jasmine's phone buzzed with a notification. Her mother had texted, "How's the flight, baby? Getting nervous about tomorrow?" Jasmine hesitated, unsure how much to share. Tanya Washington had spent years protecting her daughter from the harsh realities of racism, even while preparing her to face them. Hearing about the incident would only worry her. Before she could decide, another notification appeared, this one from her Howard classmate Zoe, "OMG, is this you?" followed by a link to a Twitter post. With a sense of dread, Jasmine clicked the link. Someone had uploaded a video titled, "Karen Gets Kicked Off Flight After Racially Profiling Young Black Woman." It already had over 50,000 views and was climbing rapidly. The footage, shot from a few rows behind, captured the confrontation from the moment Karen had accused her of stealing the wallet. The comment section was filled with outrage on her behalf, with many commending her composure in the face of such blatant discrimination. Jasmine's stomach knotted. She had never sought this kind of attention. Her work, her research, those were meant to be her legacy, not a viral moment of public humiliation, however justified the outcome. Jackson Pierce, who had returned to his own seat after takeoff, approached and knelt beside her. "Ms. Washington, I've just been informed that footage of the incident is circulating online. Our PR team is monitoring the situation, but I wanted to check if you're comfortable with how it's being handled." Jasmine showed him her phone. "I don't think any of us have control over it at this point." Jackson nodded grimly. "I understand this puts you in a difficult position. Your privacy has already been violated once today, now it's happening again, albeit under different circumstances." He handed her his business card with a direct number written on the back. "If you experience any negative consequences from this going viral, please contact me directly. National Airways will provide whatever support you need, including legal assistance if necessary." "Legal assistance?" Jasmine echoed, suddenly alarmed. "Just a precaution," Jackson assured her. "But these situations can sometimes escalate in unexpected ways." As if on cue, Jasmine's phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Dr. Eleanor Jenkins, her mentor at Howard, media requesting comment about incident on your flight. "Call me ASAP." The reality of what was happening began to sink in. By the time she landed in Boston, she might be facing reporters. By tomorrow morning, her name could be trending nationally. Her presentation, the work she'd poured years into, might be overshadowed by 5 minutes of ugly conflict. Jackson seemed to read her thoughts. "Ms. Washington, I hope you won't let this distract from your achievement. You earned your place at that conference through exceptional work. Don't allow anyone to diminish that, even indirectly." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, genuinely grateful for his understanding. As Jackson returned to his seat, Reginald Moore made his way up from economy class, pausing beside her. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said gently, "but I wanted to check on you." That was quite an ordeal. Jasmine managed a small smile. "I'm still processing, to be honest." Reginald nodded knowingly. "I've been there more times than I can count, though perhaps not quite so publicly. May I?" He gestured to the empty seat beside her, and Jasmine nodded. In 40 years of corporate life, I've had my credentials questioned, my abilities doubted, and my presence challenged, he said quietly. Each time, I had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent, knowing either choice carried consequences. He glanced around the cabin. What happened today, having witnesses, having someone in power actually intervene, that's unfortunately rare. Usually, it's just your word against theirs, and the burden of proof falls on you. That's exactly what my research addresses, Jasmine said, finding comfort in shifting to academic ground. The invisible barriers that create unequal outcomes despite seemingly neutral policies. Reginald's eyes lit up with interest, and for the next half hour, they discussed her work in detail. His perspectives as a longtime finance professional added valuable context to her theoretical models. Meanwhile, the video continued to spread. By the time the flight began its descent into Boston, it had surpassed 250,000 views. News outlets had picked up the story, with headlines ranging from objective reporting to sensationalistic clickbait. Pharmatech Industries, Karen Whitfield's employer, had already issued a statement: "We are aware of the video circulating online involving an employee. We take these matters very seriously and are investigating. Pharmatech is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of our business." Corporate damage control, Jasmine thought cynically. She'd analyzed enough press statements in her research to recognize the template. As the plane touched down at Boston Logan International, Jasmine was surprised to see a National Airways representative waiting at the gate. "Ms. Washington? I'm Melissa Chen from Customer Relations. Mr. Pierce asked me to escort you through the terminal. There are some media representatives asking for you." Jasmine's heart sank. "Already? I'm afraid so. We can take you through a staff entrance if you prefer to avoid them." Jasmine considered her options. Running from the cameras felt like hiding, yet she hadn't asked for this attention and wasn't prepared to address it. "Is there a Harvard representative here as well?" she asked, remembering Dr. Jenkins' email about media requests. "Yes, someone from the conference organizing committee is waiting at arrivals." Jasmine made her decision. "I'll face the media, but I'd like the Harvard representative with me. This isn't just about what happened on the plane, it's about my work and why I'm here." Melissa nodded approvingly. "Of course. I'll arrange it." As they waited for the other passengers to deplane, Jasmine quickly called her mother. "Baby, I just saw the news," Tanya said immediately. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," Jasmine assured her, feeling a wave of emotion at hearing her mother's concerned voice. "It was uncomfortable, but it's over now." "Over?" "It's all over the internet. That woman, the nerve of her, treating my baby that way." Despite everything, Jasmine found herself smiling at her mother's protective indignation. "Mom, listen. I need to face some reporters when I get off the plane. Any advice?" Tanya Washington had raised her daughter with fierce love and practical wisdom. She didn't hesitate. "Stand tall. Speak your truth. Remember who you are and what you're there for. And don't let them make you the victim in your own story." With those words resonating in her mind, Jasmine stepped off the plane into a new chapter of her journey, one she hadn't anticipated, but perhaps one that would amplify the very message her research sought to convey. The walk through Boston Logan International Airport felt surreal. Melissa Chen from National Airways led the way, with Jasmine following closely behind and Reginald Moore providing a supportive presence at her side. As promised, a representative from Harvard, a poised woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Dr. Clarissa Bennett from the Economics Department, joined them at the security exit. "Ms. Washington, I'm so sorry about what you've experienced," Dr. Bennett said. "The conference committee is appalled and wants to assure you that your presentation remains our priority." Jasmine appreciated the sentiment but noticed how quickly Dr. Bennett glanced at her watch. The viral incident had created complications for everyone involved. "There are about a dozen reporters near baggage claim," Melissa informed them. "We can still redirect through a service corridor if you prefer." Jasmine took a deep breath, remembering her mother's words. No, I'll speak to them briefly. But I want to be clear that I'm here for my research, not because of what happened on the plane. Dr. Bennett nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right approach. Keep the focus on your work. As they approached the media gathering, camera lights flicked on, and microphones extended toward her. Jasmine was struck by how practiced this all seemed, as if racial profiling incidents had become just another news cycle, with predictable roles and narrative arcs. Ms. Washington. How do you feel about the video going viral? Did you expect the airline's CEO to intervene? Will you be taking legal action against Karen Whitfield? Jasmine held up a hand, and to her surprise, the question subsided. She hadn't expected them to actually listen. Thank you for your interest in what happened today, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Yes, I experienced racial profiling on my flight to Boston. Yes, National Airways handled the situation appropriately once it escalated. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But what's important to understand is that my experience isn't unique or unusual. It's precisely the kind of barrier that my research addresses, the ways that prejudice creates economic obstacles through denied opportunities, additional emotional labor, and the constant tax on energy and focus. The reporters seemed momentarily taken aback by the pivot to academic language. I'm in Boston to present groundbreaking economic research at Harvard tomorrow, Jasmine continued. Research that quantifies how these soft barriers translate to measurable economic disadvantages over time. That's the real story here, not 5 minutes of uncomfortable footage, but the systemic issues that make such incidents commonplace. A reporter from a local station pressed, but how did it make you feel to be accused of theft in front of an entire cabin? Jasmine met his gaze directly. It felt like Tuesday. These aren't exceptional experiences for people who look like me, they're routine. The only exceptional part was having witnesses who spoke up and authorities who believed me. Dr. Bennett stepped forward. If you'll excuse us, Ms. Washington needs to prepare for tomorrow's presentation. The conference begins at 9 a.m. at Harvard Business School's Wilson Hall. You're welcome to attend the public portions if you'd like to learn more about her groundbreaking work. With that diplomatic redirection, they moved toward the exit where a car was waiting. Once inside the vehicle, Jasmine finally allowed herself to exhale fully. That was masterfully handled, Dr. Bennett said admiringly. You maintained dignity while redirecting to the substantive issues. The committee will be impressed. Thank you, Jasmine replied, checking her phone, which hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications. But I'm concerned that tomorrow will be about the incident rather than my research. That's a valid concern, Dr. Bennett acknowledged. But consider this, your presentation addresses economic barriers created by racial bias. You've just experienced a textbook example that resonated with millions of viewers. There's a way to incorporate this without letting it overshadow your methodology and findings. Reginald, who had accompanied them to the car, added his perspective. When I began my career in the 70s, these incidents happened behind closed doors with no recourse. The fact that accountability occurred, and publicly, represents progress, however incremental. As they drove toward Cambridge, Jasmine called her mother. Tanya had already booked a flight to Boston for the following morning, determined to be present for her daughter's presentation despite the short notice and expense. I'm not missing this, baby, she insisted when Jasmine protested about the cost. Not after everything we've been through to get you here. After checking into her hotel, upgraded to a suite by the airline, Jasmine finally had a moment alone to process the day's events. Her presentation materials were spread across the desk, representing years of meticulous research and analysis. Beside them lay her phone, still lighting up with notifications as the video continued to circulate. The contrast was stark. On one hand, substantive academic work that could potentially influence policy and create meaningful change. On the other, a viral moment of conflict that might generate temporary outrage but little lasting impact. Yet as she reviewed her slides, Jasmine began to see connections she hadn't fully articulated before. The incident on the plane wasn't separate from her research, it was a vivid illustration of her central thesis. She opened her laptop and began revising her presentation, not to center the viral incident, but to acknowledge it as data, one more proof point in the pattern her work documented. By the time she finished at 2 a.m., she had transformed her already strong presentation into something even more powerful, a bridge between academic theory and lived experience, between statistics and stories. Just before falling asleep, Jasmine received one more notification, a message from Jackson Pierce. Ms. Washington, I wanted to inform you that National Airways has implemented an immediate review of our training protocols regarding bias recognition and intervention. Your experience, while regrettable, has already catalyzed positive change within our organization. I wish you every success with your presentation tomorrow. As she drifted off to sleep, Jasmine felt a complex mix of emotions, exhaustion from the day's ordeal, anxiety about tomorrow's spotlight, but also a growing sense that perhaps everything, even the humiliation and anger, was serving a greater purpose than she had initially realized. 6 months later, Jasmine Washington stood at the podium of the National Economic Forum in Washington, D.C., addressing a packed auditorium of policymakers, academics, and corporate leaders. The Franklin Award, once her greatest achievement, now sat among several others on her rapidly expanding resume. Economic theory often treats discrimination as an anomaly, a market inefficiency that rational actors would naturally correct, she began, her voice confident and clear. But as we've documented through both quantitative analysis and qualitative experience, these inefficiencies persist because they serve powerful interests and remain invisible to those not directly affected by them. On the large screen behind her, data visualizations illustrated the economic impact of bias across various sectors. One slide showed a familiar scenario, air travel statistics, comparing treatment, upgrade rates, and complaint responses across racial demographics. 6 months ago, I experienced firsthand what our research had already told us, Jasmine continued. An incident of racial profiling on a flight to Boston became an unexpected case study in how discrimination operates, and more importantly, how accountability can disrupt it. The now infamous video had accumulated over 30 million views, sparked a national conversation about racial profiling, and led to concrete policy changes across several airlines. What had begun as a humiliating ordeal had transformed into a catalyst for change. In the front row sat Tanya Washington, beaming with pride. Beside her was Reginald Moore, who had become both mentor and champion of Jasmine's work. Jackson Pierce from National Airways occupied the seat next to Reginald, representing the corporate partners who had implemented new training programs based on Jasmine's research. The economic cost of discrimination isn't just borne by its targets, Jasmine explained, advancing to her next slide. Pharmatech Industries lost 11% of its market value in the week following the incident involving their former senior vice president. Their competitor, which immediately strengthened diversity initiatives and hired a chief inclusion officer, saw a corresponding 7% increase. Karen Whitfield had indeed lost her position at Pharmatech. The company, facing public backlash and shareholder concerns, had initially placed her on administrative leave before ultimately terminating her employment. The official reason cited was conduct inconsistent with company values, but everyone understood the real cause. For Jasmine, there was no satisfaction in Karen's downfall. The goal had never been punishment of individuals but transformation of systems. Karen was simply one manifestation of broader structural problems. What's remarkable isn't that the incident occurred, Jasmine told the audience, but that accountability followed. For every documented case like mine, thousands go unrecorded, unwitnessed, or simply disbelieved. Her research had expanded significantly since the Harvard presentation. What began as an analysis of economic mobility barriers had grown into a comprehensive framework for measuring, predicting, and addressing bias-based inefficiencies across sectors. The Washington methodology, as it was now being called, provided corporations and institutions with concrete tools to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices, not just for ethical reasons, but for economic ones. Companies that adopted the framework showed measurable improvements in talent retention, innovation metrics, and even stock performance. National Airways had become something of a case study. After the incident, Jackson Pierce had implemented company-wide training based on Jasmine's research. The airline now required all employees to complete anti-bias certification annually and had established clear protocols for addressing discrimination complaints from both passengers and staff. The transformation we're witnessing isn't just about corporate policies, Jasmine explained, advancing to her final slides. It's about creating economic systems that recognize the full value and potential of all participants. The screen displayed the details of the Jasmine Washington Scholarship for Economic Innovation, a program she had established using speaking fees and corporate sponsorships to support students from underserved communities pursuing economics degrees. The first cohort of 20 scholars would begin their studies next fall. As Jasmine concluded her presentation, the applause was immediate and sustained. Questions from the audience reflected not just interest but engagement with the substantive issues rather than the viral moment that had initially brought her wider attention. Afterward, as attendees networked over coffee, the Secretary of Transportation approached Jasmine. "Ms. Washington, your work has directly influenced our department's new guidelines for passenger rights enforcement," she said. "We'd like to invite you to join our advisory committee on equitable transportation access." Such invitations have become increasingly common as Jasmine's research gained recognition beyond academic circles. Corporate boards, policy think tanks, and government agencies all sought her expertise, not because of her viral fame, but because of the rigorous methodology she had developed. Tanya Washington watched these interactions with misty eyes. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered when they had a moment alone. Jasmine's father had passed away when she was just 7, but his belief in education as the path to transformation had shaped her journey profoundly. "I wish he could see this," Jasmine agreed, squeezing her mother's hand. "He can," Tanya insisted. "Through you, through everything you're building." Later that evening, as Jasmine boarded another first-class flight, this time to Chicago for a consulting engagement, she experienced a moment of déjà vu. The familiar anxiety surfaced briefly as she approached the premium cabin, the internalized expectation of questioning or challenge. But the flight attendant merely smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington. We're honored to have you with us today." As she settled into her seat, Jasmine noticed a passenger across the aisle watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment, she tensed, anticipating another confrontation. Instead, the woman, middle-aged, white, expensively dressed, simply said, "I implemented your methodology at my company last quarter. Employee satisfaction is up 17%, and we're seeing promising changes in our innovation pipeline. Thank you for your work." Jasmine nodded, simultaneously surprised and encouraged. "I'm glad to hear it's making a difference." As the plane taxied toward the runway, Jasmine reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The humiliating incident that might have derailed her career had instead amplified her voice. The research that might have remained within academic circles was now influencing corporate policies and government regulations. One viral moment hadn't solved systemic racism or eliminated economic barriers. But it had created an opening, a crack in the wall of indifference that had allowed her message to penetrate spaces previously closed to such discussions. When the flight attendant came by with pre-departure beverages, she served Jasmine first, with genuine respect rather than the performative deference that often followed recognition. It was a small thing, being treated with basic dignity shouldn't be remarkable. Yet it represented the incremental progress that Jasmine's work sought to accelerate, the shift from exceptionalism to expectation, from occasional accountability to systematic change. As the plane lifted into the air, Jasmine opened her laptop to review materials for tomorrow's consultation. On her screen was a draft of her forthcoming book, Visible Barriers, Quantifying the Economic Cost of Discrimination. The journey was far from complete. But with each presentation, each policy change, each scholarship recipient, the path forward became clearer. What had begun as an academic investigation into economic disparities had evolved into a movement for transformative change. And it had all started with one flight, one confrontation, and the courage to stand firm in the face of injustice. Jasmine's story teaches us that confronting discrimination requires both personal courage and systemic accountability. While individual resilience is admirable, true change happens when institutions and witnesses take responsibility. The economic impact of bias extends beyond personal humiliation. It creates measurable inefficiencies that harm organizations and society. What makes this story powerful isn't just that justice prevailed in one instance, but that the incident catalyzed broader transformation. Jasmine's ability to connect her personal experience to her professional expertise allowed her to convert trauma into meaningful reform. She refused to be defined by victimization, instead using it as evidence supporting her research. The story also highlights the importance of allies at all levels. From Reginald's solidarity to Jackson's executive action, each intervention demonstrated that dismantling discrimination requires collective effort. Not everyone has a CEO witnessing their mistreatment, which underscores why institutional policies matter more than individual, good actors. Perhaps most importantly, Jasmine's journey reminds us that accountability isn't about punishment but transformation. Her focus remained on creating systems that recognize human dignity and potential, not on Karen's downfall, but on building something better for everyone. Have you ever witnessed discrimination being challenged in public? How did you respond? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story of resilience and accountability resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives about overcoming injustice. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to understand how standing against discrimination creates positive change. Thank you for watching, and remember that speaking truth to power isn't just about personal vindication, it's about creating a more equitable world for everyone.